Baruch Frydman-Kohl is the Rabbi Emeritus of Beth Tzedek Congregation, where he served as the Ann and Max Tenenbaum Senior Rabbi for almost 3 decades. He was awarded a doctorate in philosophy from the Jewish Theological Seminary, is a senior rabbinic fellow of the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and has published both academic and popular essays. Rav Baruch sat for 20 years on the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards for the Rabbinical Assembly, chaired the Rabbinical Assembly of Ontario and the Toronto Board of Rabbis, and is now vice chair of the Canadian Rabbinic Caucus. He has co-led 4 multi-faith Path of Abraham missions to the Holy Land and currently serves as a member of the Catholic Jewish Consultation of Canada. Rav Baruch was honored by UJA Federation of Toronto with the Gordy Wolf for Jewish Communal Professional Leadership Award and is a member of the Order of Canada. It is my pleasure to invite Rav Baruch to teach the congregation this morning.
Shabbat Shalom. It's wonderful to be here, to see so many familiar faces, some who have been members of Beth Tzedek and now are here, some who have grown up here and occasionally migrate to Beth Tzedek. It's just wonderful that we have this kind of community where people can feel a little bit of flow going back and forth. Sometimes at Beth Tzedek, you also see that between Beth Tzedek and Shar Shamayim. It's wonderful that our community can really respect and regard all of us and see us all as included in that community. I appreciate the invitation of Rabbi Splansky to be with you today while she's on sabbatical leave. And I'm grateful to you, Rabbi, and to the Cantor, to Cantor Rosen, and to Cantor McConnell, to Rabbi McConnell, for their warm welcome today. Rather than comment on the release last week of Emily, Rami, and Daron, instead of discussing the return home of the 4 women abducted from their base in Nahal Oz, in lieu of focusing on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, or the new President of the United States, I'm going to discuss what to take on a Jewish faith journey. But first, take a moment, just blink your eyes. And now take a moment to think about last Shabbat and Sunday and Monday, and try to recall your emotions. Boom. History, security, life. So much changes in that blink. And yet the memory that we have of ancient trauma and redemption remains our story to be told and retold for generations. As you know, for many of us, our position in society, culture, and intellectual life is paramount, more significant than gathering in synagogue for prayer. David Brooks of the New York Times writes of the Jewish identity that framed his childhood. We only said the Shema on the High Holy Days, but we recited the "Did you know he is a Jew?" every day. All of the geniuses turned out to be Jews. Einstein, Freud, Marx, Lionel Trilling. Exodus was the journey from obscurity to accomplishment. We had exchanged the robes of the righteous for the dream of the Nobel Prize. And yet, something has begun to change. Instead of smirking at religion, some thought leaders are now wondering if they might have missed something. Jonathan Haidt, the psychologist, recently stated, We evolved after a long period of group versus group conflict and violence, with the capacity to make a sacred circle, and then to bind ourselves with others in a way that creates a strong community. Authentic community is not created or sustained by secular ideologies. Brooks has discussed his slow transition from being a cultural Jew to being concerned about a moral base for society and personal character formation. As he went on that journey, he shifted from sociology to virtue ethics. And I appreciated that in his columns, he often quoted Jewish religious thinkers, such as Rabbis Joseph Soloveitchik, Abraham Joshua Heschel, and Jonathan Sacks. And I happen to like the fact that he often placed them in dialogue with serious Christian thinkers, such as Augustine or C.S. Lewis, Paul Tillich, and the poet Christian Wyman, who was introduced to me through Brooks. Last month, Brooks wrote an essay, The Shock of Faith, about his transition from agnosticism to faith. And I want to share with you a piece of that. He says, I remember transcendent moments at the foot of a mountain, looking at images of the distant universe or of a baby in the womb. You have a sense of being in the presence of something overwhelming, mysterious, beyond the rim of our understanding. And some of you have shared those feelings. Just remember them for a moment. And now he discusses another such moment. In 2013, I was in a crowded subway car in New York. I looked around and had this shimmering awareness that all the people in it had souls. Some piece of them that had no size, color, weight, or shape, but gave them infinite value. It occurred to me that if people had souls, maybe there was a soul giver. And once you accept that there is a spiritual element in each person, it's a short leap to the idea that there is a spiritual element to the universe as a whole. So initially, as I read this, I was stirred by the power of Brooks' experience. But it became clear to me as I read further that this boy chick had migrated into a very faithful Christianity. And that syncretic faith may work for him, but we Jews have learned to resist a mishmash, a confusion of faiths. So if we were to be like Brooks or others on a journey, what would you take on your personal faith journey? So I want to share with you at admissions interviews at the Jewish Theological Seminary in the old days. One of the members of the committee was Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. There's a story that I know the person he was involved with at the time. Heschel asked him, so, in the very kind of squeaky voice, because that was his voice, if you were to be on the North Pole, what would you take with you? And this young man, because in those days it was only young men, who wanted to get into rabbinical school, thought for a moment and said, I would take my siddur, my talit, my tefillin. And Heschel said, wouldn't you be cold? But I want you to think for a moment, after the encounter at the bush, after Moshe and Aaron have gone to Pharaoh, after the workload of the Hebrews is increased, after the people come back and complain, Moshe turns to God and says, "Why have you sent me? You haven't rescued your people." And the Torah portion last week ends with a divine reaffirmation of the promise, but then goes silent. James Kugel notes, such silences have a special meaning in the Torah. In a normal conversation, A speaks to B, and B then answers. But sometimes A speaks to B, and B says nothing. Some of us have experienced that in our lives with people that we love, people that we have distance with. Ancient readers and listeners understood that B's silence was a way of indicating that he was still waiting for something more from A. Moshe must have been pleased with God's promise that Pharaoh would take the Israelites out of Egypt, that Pharaoh would let the Israelites leave Egypt. But Moshe was waiting for more. And so our portion begins, as you read this morning, Ani Adonai, I am the Eternal. I am Yud He Vav He. I am Hashem. However you want to read that, and there's a wonderful long excursus on that here in the Torah itself, beginning in your volume, the Plaut Chumash on page 393. You don't have to read it now. I appeared to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, Yud He Vav He. Kugel comments, Moses already knew God's sacred name. So did Noah, Abraham, Lot, and others. What's the point of explaining it here as if for the first time? Often, he goes on, God finishes a pronouncement with the words, Ani Adonai, or Ani Adonai Elohechem, which we chanted today when you finish the Shema at the very end of the paragraph that talks about tzitzit. It's the ancient equivalent of a signature. When you rent an apartment or buy a car, there's usually some form of written agreement. And at the bottom of the last page, the parties to the agreement append their signatures, and presto, the agreement becomes official. Something similar happens when God says, I am the Lord. It means something like, I stand by what I said, or this is now official. Moshe waits and waits. Remember, it was last Shabbat, until God finally says, Ani Adonai. But at the same time, God kind of scolds Moshe. When I appeared to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, I didn't have to give them any guarantee. They trusted me, and I took care of the rest. But you, Moshe, seem to need some sort of guarantee. All right, I'll give it to you. But the next time, just trust me without any guarantee, the way your ancestors did. So what I want to say is one of the things you need to take with you on your Jewish journey is trust. Despite all of the challenges that we may face, individually and collectively, Kaveh el Adonai, wait with hope for the eternal. Our timeline with God may not be the same. My timeline may be different from God's. But wait. Trust. hope. You probably noticed in the Torah reading that in this wonderful, beautiful Torah reading, Yeshar Koach, that after this section, the Torah follows with the genealogy of Moshe. Rabbi Tali Adler says, imagine Moshe, who feels he's an outsider, and the Israelites now don't want to listen to him. So by recounting his ancestry, the Torah offers Moshe a form of reassurance, a reminder that he has a history to draw on in a moment of paralysis and crisis. And I would say a second thing to take on this Jewish journey is to remember our history. Whether we are Jews by choice or by birth, a covenantal commitment reminds us that our people has faced dark nights, impossible situations, and we have persevered. If you want, just for a moment, please close your eyes. Don't fall asleep. Take a moment to imagine yourself in a circle with people who are part of your history. Parents, sibs, grandparents, aunts, uncles, maybe even great-grandparents. When you face decisions and challenges, they can be with you. Now open your eyes. 3. A midrash imagines that in Egypt, the Jewish people would gather on Shabbat to read scrolls and hear words of hope. The midrash doesn't tell us what the scrolls contained, but there is a suggestion by Rabbi Zev Wolf Einhorn that they contained the stories of Genesis, stories of the prophecies, the promises made to their ancestors. And the stories gave the people of Israel strength and hope. By the way, something similar occurred in the American South, in the African American community of slavery. You can see yourself as part of a greater story. Now, our story is different from the stories of Christianity and Islam, or the stories of Buddhism and Hinduism. Their stories are special to them, just as ours is sacred to us. So, another element of Jewish faith is to read and study Torah and to situate ourselves inside of a master narrative of our sacred story. And you'll hear rabbis do that as couples get married, as people are buried, as children become bar and bat mitzvah. What we try to do is say, you have a place in this story. You're part of it. That exodus will take our ancestors to Sinai and to the mitzvot which serve as a reminder of the encounter with the divine. We enact a relationship with God through our mitzvot, our responsibilities. So I'd say fourth thing to put in is to realize that our embodied actions are actually statements of faith. It's not just a theological proposition, I believe in, or I believe that. But it's what we do that is also a deep statement of our faith. According to Ramban, who was mentioned earlier this morning from the Bima, the wilderness sanctuary is the purpose of the Exodus. And Holy Blossom identifies this special place as its Mishkan. For Jews, the Mishkan represents a commitment to regular prayer. And the wilderness Mishkan had particular procedures, rituals, as we do. Prayer, but not exclusively in Hebrew, and not exclusively by ritual, is a fifth part to pack on your Jewish journey. And finally, the divine commitment to Moshe, as we read in the Torah portion, when God identifies the divine being to Moshe here and says, this is now official. Including that is the promise that Bnei Israel, a nation, not just a family, will now reach the land of promise. And I would say our hope for the land, our Zionist ideals and aspirations are always part of our pekel that we take with us as Jews on our journey. So in our Torah, the divine clarion, Ani Adonai, comes with stories and genealogy and points towards mitzvot and to the land of promise. Boom. Sometimes it feels like it's a moment. And if we are blessed, we may have those moments of great spiritual insight and clarity. Maybe it might happen on a mountain or in a synagogue, and perhaps the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls. But spiritual transformation for us as Jews comes after religious formation. So religious formation leads to spiritual transformation. It precedes it. It comes with stories and history, with study and with prayer, with mitzvot and Israel, and with hopeful trust. Our ancestors endured much difficulty in order to build a people. We have to figure out what we're taking in our package, and we have to be able to share that with young people to have that strength. But the circle of your ancestors, the covenantal stories of our chain of tradition, do indeed give us strength and power. Tali Adler observes, sometimes the world around us is too dark for us to imagine a better future. Some days it is impossible to imagine the day after. In those moments, we need some assurance. And what we want some assurance, but we don't always get that assurance. Sometimes what we have is the story of who we are, how we have gotten this far, what has sustained us. And in those moments, the most important things we can do are to recite to ourselves the name of God. Adonai. Adonai. To hold it, to contemplate it, to remember those who came before us, and to trust, as we say in our prayers, Golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or, that daylight will come after darkness. Hold that as you go forward on your journey. Shabbat Shalom.